She was 23 and had just been thrown out. Not let go gently, not given notice, thrown, in a single hard morning, out of the only place she had left to be. And with $10, the last money she owned, she bought an abandoned stamp mill standing silent in a canyon above a dying town in the Montana Territory. A great timber and iron hulk the mining company had walked away from 20 years before. The huge machinery stood frozen and rusting. The flume that once fed it water had rotted to splinters. The company agent in the nearest town told her the ore was played out, the mill was a dead monster nobody wanted, and a young woman alone in a canyon with a ruin would come to grief before the snow. But what nobody knew, not the agent, not the town, not the girl herself, was that in the sealed retort room at the heart of that old mill, hidden since 1872, was something that would change her life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Marielle Vance had been raised in the roar of machinery and had never been afraid of a big broken thing in her life. She was born in 1869 in a Montana mining town, the daughter of a millwright, the man who built and mended the great machines of the mines, the stamp batteries and the water wheels and the ore cars and the endless belts and shafts and gears that turned rock into money. Her father was an artist of iron and timber, a man who could look at a frozen 50-ton machine and hear, in his mind, exactly where it had stopped singing and why. And Marielle, from the time she could toddle across a mill floor, understood machines the way other children understood animals, as living things with moods and needs and a logic you could learn if you paid attention. Her father took her everywhere, taught her everything. Let her hand him wrenches on the high scaffolds and read the great mechanisms with him. Because she had the gift, and he knew it, and he did not care that she was a girl. By the time she was 15, she could diagnose a 6-stamp battery by the sound of its stamps falling, could tell a worn cam from a cracked one by ear across a roaring mill floor. Machines were her language, and her father was the one who had taught it to her, and the two of them were a whole world. And then her father died, crushed under the very machinery he loved, in an accident at the mill when Marielle was 20, and the world she had shared with him died with him. She had no mother. That loss was old. She had no other family. And a girl who understood machinery was a girl the mining world had absolutely no place for. They would not hire a woman millwright, would not let her near the machines she'd been raised inside, and the trade that was her whole inheritance and her whole self was simply closed to her because of what she was. She took what work a mining town gave a woman, cooking, cleaning, minding a boarding house, and it was like asking a musician to sweep a concert hall, to be surrounded every day by the machinery she loved and forbidden to touch it. She endured it 3 years at a Milltown boarding house, because it kept her near the great machines, even if she could only listen to them from the outside. She was thrown out of the boarding house at 23, and it was not even cruelty, only the ordinary hardness of the world. The mill the town lived on finally closed, as they all did, and the boarding house emptied, and the owner sold up and moved on, and told Marielle, not unkindly, that there was nothing left for anyone here, and she'd best move along too. She was put out with her carpetbag and her father's roll of fine millwright's tools, the one thing of his she'd kept, and $10, and no place in all the world to go. 23 years old and thrown out, and carrying the tools of a trade no one would let her practice. She heard about the stamp mill the way the wandering hear about things, in a stage depot, from a mine promoter grumbling about dead properties. There was an old mill up Sorrow Creek Canyon, he said, above the town of Delph that had boomed gold and busted, a stamp mill that had stood silent 20 years since the company gave up on the ore. The county would take $10 for it just to clear the books. Who'd want a dead stamp mill up a canyon? A great rusting monster miles from anywhere. The promoter laughed. But Marielle Vance did not laugh. She had $10. And a stamp mill, a great machine, the very kind of thing her father had built and taught her to love. was the one building in all the world that was made of her whole childhood, the one dead thing she knew in her bones how to bring back to life. Everyone saw a rusting monster. She saw a machine that had only stopped singing, and she knew how to find out why. She rode a freight most of the way and walked the last miles up Sorrow Creek Canyon, the mountains closing dark and timbered around her. The creek loud beside the trail, and at the head of the canyon she found the mill, an enormous structure of great timbers and iron, built into the mountainside in tiers the way stamp mills were, so the ore could travel down through it by gravity. The ore bins at the top, the great stamp battery below, the tables and the machinery descending stage by stage to the canyon floor. It was silent now, utterly silent, the huge stamps frozen mid-fall, the water wheel still, the rotted flume hanging in pieces, the whole great machine held in a stillness that was almost grief. For a mill is made to roar, and a silent one is a kind of death. To the promoter it was a rusting monster. To Marielle, standing in the canyon with her father's tools on her back, it was the most beautiful thing she had seen since he died, a great machine, sleeping, that she alone in all that country knew how to wake. The county's business was done down the canyon in the town of Delph, at a company and land office run by a tired man named Horace Skeed who could not think what the girl wanted with the mill. The Sorrow Creek mill was worthless, he told her. The gold ore had played out 20 years back. The company had stripped what machinery was worth hauling and abandoned the rest. The great hulk up the canyon was a dead loss the county couldn't give away. There was nothing in it, Skeed said, but frozen iron and rot, and no one had set foot in it in 20 years. $10 would make it hers, and his plain advice was to keep the money and take the stage to somewhere with a living in it. Marielle laid $10 on his desk, the last she had, and signed her name in a firm, clear hand, and Horace Skeed gave her the deed and a doubtful look and the certainty that the canyon would break her by winter. The canyon did not break her. There was no town up at the mill to laugh at her, only, some days after she came, a single visitor, an old man named Emrys Toole, who had worked the Sorrow Creek mill in its great days as a battery man, tending the stamps, and who had never left the canyon country when the mill died, living alone in a cabin down the creek with his memories. He climbed up to see the fool who'd bought the dead mill, and stood in the great silent building watching the girls study the frozen machinery, and something moved in his weathered face. He had known her kind of person, he said, had known millwrights, had watched them read a machine the way this girl was reading it, with her hand flat on the cold iron and her head cocked as if listening. And when Marielle told him her father had been a millwright and named him, the old man's eyes changed, for he had known her father, years ago, in another camp. He stayed the day. He told her how the mill had run in its prime, the roar of it, the men, the gold. And when he left he said he'd be back, and he was, again and again, an old battery man drawn back to the mill of his best years. And Marielle, who had lost the one person who shared her world, found she had, at last, someone who remembered the language she spoke. She poured herself into the mill the way you pour yourself into the thing you were born for and forbidden to do. Everything her father had taught her, she brought to it. She cleared the rotted flume and studied how the water had fed the wheel, and began, board by board, to plan its rebuilding. She freed the frozen stamps, one by one, working the rust out of the great mechanism with her father's tools and her father's patience, until a stamp that had not moved in 20 years lifted and fell again under her hand, and the sound of it, one great iron stamp falling on the die, rang through the canyon like a bell. The first voice the mill had raised in a generation, and old Emery's Toole, hearing it from down the creek, climbed up with tears on his face to see the machine begin to wake. That single falling stamp did something to Marielle she had not expected. She had been 3 years forbidden the thing she loved, 3 years listening to machinery from the outside like a deaf woman watching people dance, and when that great iron voice rang out through the canyon, a sound her father had taught her to read. A sound that was the whole language of her childhood. Something broke open in her that had been sealed as tight as the retort room itself. She sat down on the cold mill floor beside the stamp she had freed, and put her face in her hands, and wept, not from sorrow, but from a kind of homecoming so fierce it hurt, because for the first time since the machinery took her father she was doing the work he had made her for, in a place no one could throw her out of, with her own 2 hands on her own great machine. She had thought that part of her was dead. She had made her peace, or thought she had, with a life of listening from the outside. And here, in a canyon nobody wanted, over a machine the world had left for dead, she discovered that the millwright her father raised had only been sleeping, like the mill, waiting for a place that would let her wake. She was reviving it not to crush ore, for the ore was gone, but because a millwright's daughter could not stand to let a great machine lie dead when she knew how to make it live. And in the doing she found the town of Delph, down the canyon, beginning to notice, for a mill coming back to life, even a little, is a thing that reaches something in an old mining town, and men who had worked that mill in their youth began to climb the canyon to watch, and to lend a hand, and to remember. She worked her way through the great machine tier by tier, freeing and cleaning and understanding, and she came at last to the retort room, the small, strong, closed room at the heart of the mill where the final work had been done. For this was where the mill's whole labor came to its end, where the gold, caught from the crushed ore, was brought in its raw amalgamated form to be refined by heat in the retort into pure metal at last. It was the treasure room of any mill, the one room built strong and kept locked, and the Sorrow Creek Mill's retort room had been sealed when the mill closed. Its heavy door not merely shut but bricked, she found, the doorway filled with mortared stone, so that the room at the mill's heart had been walled up entire when the company left. A millwright's daughter knew that a retort room was never bricked shut in the ordinary course of closing a mill. You locked it. You did not wall it up. Someone had sealed this room deliberately, and meant it to stay sealed. She knew it the way her father had taught her to know a machine that had been tampered with, by a wrongness in the work that spoke of intention. She studied the brick doorway, and saw that it had been done by no mason but by hands in a kind of solemn haste, and she made her choice the way her father had made his choices, deliberately, and she took a hammer and worked the mortared stone loose course by course until the sealed heart of the mill stood open, and the cold, still air of 20 years breathed out at her. She took a lamp and stepped through into the retort room that had been walled up since before her father died. It was not ransacked, not stripped like the rest of the mill. It had been left whole, and ordered and almost reverent, the retort and its furnace cold in the center, the tools on their racks, and on the heavy assay table, set out deliberately as if for whoever should someday break in, 3 things: a row of small heavy iron flasks, sealed, a bound ledger, and a letter, weighted with a lump of raw amalgam, the paper gone amber, the hand strong and plain and sorrowing. It read, on the outside fold, to whoever wakes this mill. Her hands, steady on the coldest iron, were not quite steady now. She set the lamp on the assay table and unfolded the letter and read, and the sealed heart of the mill was silent around her. If you have opened this room, it began, then you have come to wake this mill, and only a certain kind of person wakes a dead mill, someone who loves machines the way I once did, before grief took the joy of it from me. So I can speak to you plain, as I could speak to no one in my life, for what I have to confess is not a crime against the law but a wound between 2 men. And I have been dead a long time carrying the shame of it, and the dead are patient but they long to set things right. His name had been Cornelius Ashe, and he had been half owner of the Sorrow Creek Mill, and the whole of his confession was about the other half, about his partner and his friend, the man he had wronged. They had come to the canyon young, he wrote, the 2 of them, Cornelius Ashe and a man named Tobias Wren, partners and friends closer than brothers, and they had built the Sorrow Creek Mill together with their own hands and their pooled savings and their shared dream. For years it had been good, the ore rich, The partnership true, the two of them prospering side by side. And then the ore had begun to fail, as ore does, and hard times had come, and hard times are where friendships are tested and too often broken. Here is my shame, Cornelius Ashe wrote. As the ore failed and the money grew short, I let a lie grow between us. A man came to me, a buyer, a speculator, who wanted the mill, and who whispered to me that Tobias was cheating me, skimming the gold, keeping a second set of books, and I was frightened and tired, and I believed him, God forgive me, because it is easier to believe the worst of a friend than to face a hard time honestly beside him. I accused Tobias. I accused him of theft, my partner, my friend, to his face, on no proof but a stranger's poison, and Tobias, who was innocent, I know now he was innocent. I knew it in my heart even then. Tobias was so wounded that a man he loved would believe such a thing of him that he did not even defend himself. He simply looked at me with a grief I have never forgotten, and he signed over his half of the mill to me for a pittance. And he left the canyon, and I never saw him again. And the speculator Cornelius Ashe wrote, the man who had whispered the lie? He had wanted the two partners split so he could buy the mill cheap from a broken partnership, and once Tobias was gone and Cornelius sat alone and guilty with the whole failing mill, the speculator had turned on him too, and Cornelius had seen, far too late, the whole shape of the swindle, that there had never been a second set of books, never been a theft, only a stranger's lie that had done exactly what it was designed to do, which was to break a friendship so a mill could be stolen cheap. But by then, Tobias was gone, vanished into the country, and the damage was done, and Cornelius Ashe was left alone with a dying mill and the unbearable knowledge of what his own weakness and mistrust had cost the best friend he ever had. I ran the mill alone 2 more years, he wrote, and it was ashes in my mouth, for every stamp that fell reminded me of the man I built it with and drove away. And I resolved, before the end, to do the one thing I still could. The mill made one last great cleanup before the ore gave out entirely, the richest single recovery of its last years, a small fortune in gold. And I did not divide it, and I did not spend it, and I did not let the speculator have it. I refined it here, in this room, into these flasks, and I set aside with it the full and honest ledger of the mill's whole life, which proves to anyone who reads it that Tobias Wren never stole a grain, that the books always balanced, that my accusation was a lie built on a lie, and I sealed it all in the heart of the mill, and I walled the room, and I set out to find Tobias and bring him back and give him his half and beg his forgiveness on my knees. But he had not found him. The country was vast, and Tobias Wren had vanished into it, and Cornelius Ashe had searched and failed, and grown old and sick with the searching, and had come at last to the end knowing he would die without ever making it right. So I leave it to you, he wrote, whoever wakes this mill. In these flasks is the last gold of Sorrow Creek, and it is not mine. Half of it was always Tobias Wren's, stolen from him not by theft but by my mistrust, and the rest I would give gladly to see the wrong undone. And in the ledger is the proof of his innocence, that I was too proud and too late to give him living. Find him, if he lives, or his people if he does not, and give them the gold that is theirs, and show them the ledger that clears his name in his own partner's hand, and tell them that Cornelius Ashe knew at the end that he had thrown away the best friend a man ever had over a stranger's lie, and died sorry, and left this as the only apology a dead man can make. Do this, and you will have healed a wound I could not. That is all I ask, and it is everything. See, Ashe, alone in the mill we built, 1872, Marielle Vance sat in the sealed heart of the mill with the letter in her hands and the lamp throwing her shadow across the cold retort, and she wept, not for the gold, which she had not yet even touched, but for the 2 dead men, the partners closer than brothers, and the lie that a stranger had slipped between them, and the friendship broken over a hard time that honest men should have faced side by side. She, who had lost the one person who shared her world, and would have given anything for one more day beside him, understood in her bones the size of what Cornelius Ashe had thrown away, and the weight of a reconciliation that had come too late for the living, and now waited, in her hands, to be carried out among the dead. She opened the flasks, and there was the last gold of Sorrow Creek, a small fortune, half of it a wronged man's stolen due. And she opened the ledger, and read enough to see it was exactly as Ashe had said, an honest record of the mill's whole life, proving beyond doubt that Tobias Wren had never stolen a grain, the vindication of a friend written too late by the partner who had wronged him. She sat a long time with it in the cold, sealed room, and the strangeness settled over her the way the canyon dark settled over the mill. All the hidden things she might have dreamed of finding in a dead mill, gold. And there was gold. And the true treasure of the room was not the metal at all, but a broken heart, sealed up 20 years, still trying to mend itself. Cornelius Ashe had walled his confession into the heart of his own mill the way a man buries something he cannot bear to carry and cannot bear to lose, and he had trusted, across all those years, that someone would come who understood what he had thrown away, not a treasure hunter, who would take the gold and never read the letter, but someone who knew, in their own bones, what it was to lose the person who shared your world. And Marielle, who had lost exactly that, who would have crawled to Oregon on her knees for one more day beside her father, understood why the room had waited for her. Because Cornelius Ashe's deepest wish was not that his gold be found, but that his friend be forgiven. And only a person who knew the weight of a lost bond would carry that wish further than the gold. She had come looking for a machine to wake. She had found, instead, 2 dead men who needed her to wake something far harder to bring back to life than any mill. She showed old Emery's tool, because he was the only soul she had, and because he had worked the mill in those very years. And when she read him the letter, the old battery man bowed his white head, and was quiet a long while, and then he told her that he remembered it. Remembered the 2 partners, Ashe and Wren, closer than brothers, and remembered the terrible season when they split, and Wren left the canyon a broken man, and no one ever knew quite why. The camp had gossiped that there'd been a theft, that Wren had cheated Ashe. That was the story that stuck. For 20 years the country had remembered Tobias Wren, if it remembered him at all, as the partner who stole from his friend. And here, in the mill's sealed heart, was the truth in the wronged wronger's own hand, that there had been no theft, only a lie, and a good man driven off by it, and a friend who died sorry. Then Marielle Vance did the thing Cornelius Ashe had begged of her across 20 years, and it became a quest that took her the better part of 2 years and taught her the whole geography of the West. She did not report the gold to Horace Skeed or the county, for it was not the county's, it was Tobias Wren's, or his heirs, and she would carry it to no one else. Nor did she keep a flask of it, though the law of finders and the ruin of the mill would both have let her, because it was not hers, and she had been raised by a man who taught her that a thing built between 2 people belonged to both of them, and she would not become the speculator who profited from their broken bond. Instead, with old Emeris's memory of the man, and the mill's records naming his home place, and a great many letters written in her firm, clear hand across a dozen states and territories, she set out to find Tobias Wren, or whatever remained of him in the world. He was dead. She found that early he had died years before, still a poor man, still, she would learn, carrying the wound of a friend's mistrust to his own grave. But he had not died without people. Tobias Wren had a daughter and grandchildren, living hard and honest on a small failing farm in Oregon, and they had grown up in the long shadow of a family shame they only half understood. A grandfather who had come home from Montana broken and silent, who would never speak of the partner or the mill, who had died with something crushed in him that his family had never been able to name. And to that farm, at the end of 2 years' searching, came Marielle Vance, with a small fortune in gold, and a dead man's ledger, and a dead man's letter, to tell them the truth their grandfather had never been able to bear to tell, that he had been innocent, that he had never stolen anything, that he had been driven from all he built by a stranger's lie and a friend's weakness, and that the friend had known it, and died sorry, and left this, the gold that was half his by right, and the written proof of his innocence in the very hand that had wronged him. Tobias Wren's daughter read her father's vindication, 30 years too late for him to see it, and wept for the silent broken man she had grown up beside and never understood, and understood him at last. Mariel gave them the gold, all of it, for she reasoned that the half which had been Ashy's. Ashy had plainly meant them to have two, as the only apology he could make, and she gave them the ledger and the letter, and she asked nothing for herself but the thing she valued above any gold, to have been the one who carried a reconciliation home. The Wren family, saved from their failing farm by the restitution and freed at last from the shame of a lie, tried to press some of the gold upon her, and she would not take it, but they gave her the one thing she would accept, which was the ledger itself, when they had made their copies, to keep at the mill where the two partners had built their dream, so that the whole true story would have a home. She did not grow rich from any of it, and did not wish to, but she was given, in the doing of it, the life she had been forbidden. When she came back to Sorrow Creek from Oregon, she found that the story had spread. The girl who woke the dead mill and healed a 30-year wound between two dead partners, and that the town of Delph and the old millmen had come to see the Sorrow Creek mill not as a dead monster, but as a kind of monument, and Mariel Vance not as a foolish girl, but as the millwright her father had raised. And a millwright, it turned out, the reviving mining country still needed, whatever it thought of a woman doing the work. They came to her, quietly at first, and then openly, with their sick machinery, their frozen pumps and broken batteries and failing wheels, because there was no one else in that country who could read a great machine the way she could, and a mill that will not run is a town that will not eat. She never restored the Sorrow Creek mill to crushing ore, for the ore was truly gone. But she made it her workshop and her home, the great machine kept alive and singing for its own sake. And from it she went out to wake the other sleeping machines of the mining country, the first woman millwright anyone up there had ever seen, doing at last the work that was her whole inheritance and her whole self. Horace Skeed, the agent who had told her the canyon would break her by winter, lived to see the dead Sorrow Creek mill become a living workshop, and the girl he doubted become the millwright the whole country sent for, and had the grace, when next she came down the canyon, to tell her he had never been so glad to be so wrong. If you go up Sorrow Creek Canyon today in the Montana high country, and a few still do, for the old mill stands yet, kept as it was, the great stamp mill rises in its tiers against the mountainside, silent now again but whole, cared for by those who inherited Mariel Vance's love of the great machines. The retort room at its heart is open, no longer walled, and in it, behind glass, they keep 3 iron flasks, empty now, and a folded amber letter in a sorrowing hand, and a copy of a ledger that cleared a wronged man's name 30 years too late. And on the wall beside them hang 2 photographs, found and framed by Mariel herself, 2 young men standing proud before a new-built mill, partners and friends closer than brothers. In the days before a stranger's lie came between them, visitors are brought there and told the story of the 2 partners and the wound between them, and the girl who woke the dead mill and carried their reconciliation home across 30 years and 1,000 miles. And carved into the great main timber of the mill, where Mariel Vance said it, is the thing she came to believe over her long life among the machines, which is the whole lesson of the sealed room at the mill's heart: don't let a lie come between you, and the ones you love. There is a kind of inheritance that has nothing to do with blood, and everything to do with mending what was broken. It waits in the sealed hearts of the world's dead machines, not for the one who wants the gold, but for the one who understands that a healed friendship is worth more than any fortune, and it seems always to find the person who has lost someone, and so knows exactly what a broken bond is worth. The world had told Mariel Vance she was worthless the same way it had told that mill it was dead, with a shrug and a low price and a great machine left to rust. It only ever takes one person who knows the cost of a broken bond to prove the world's cold arithmetic wrong. Marielle Vance was 23 years old and thrown out. She had $10 to her name, and she spent it on an abandoned stamp mill up a lonely canyon in the Montana Territory. It was the best $10 she ever spent. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, is there someone a misunderstanding drove out of your life that you wish you could set right? We'd love to hear your story. See you in the next one.